This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek, and we've been covering the struggle in the Teamsters Union, the fight against the rise of fascism, and the danger of the president of the Teamster Union inviting Trump to join the Teamsters to have a meeting at the Teamsters office. And also, Trump had a press conference at the lobby of the Teamsters, using the Teamsters lobby as a campaign location. And I wanted to interview a brother today, a Teamster, Tony Cochran, who has been involved in a struggle, partly around that, but partly on attacks that he's faced on the job. So welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. And I'm glad to be here.
So Tony, why don't you talk about how you became a Teamster and what's that like working at UPS?
So I had spent some time, about the last 10 years, in Europe, where my husband is from London. And I came back after the pandemic lockdowns. My citizenship in Italy, the situation there was just very bad in terms of the economic situation. So I came back at the beginning of May 2021, and just needed a job. So the first job that I got was, the first offer I got was at UPS, and I knew that they were unionized. So I took it, and I started on the 10th of May 2021. So I'm coming up on 3 years of being a proud UPS Teamster.
And I mean, a lot of Teamsters were fighting for PPE, healthcare during COVID. Was that an issue in Portland?
Yeah, so when we were, I was there during the pandemic, and a lot of folks were still getting the vaccinations or not able to get vaccinations. I believe that I'd had my first shot uh, a day before I started, but I hadn't yet been fully vaccinated. And the company's policy at that time was to put one person in a trailer in order to encourage social distancing. And then here in Oregon, we did have a mask mandate, which meant that the company was having to provide masks. But I know that in some states, and in many locations outside of states where there were mandates, the company was not providing any PPE. And of course, there was no hazard pay. And there was also no pay for the fact that we were doing a lot more volume. As you know, during the pandemic, package volume picked up incredibly, and we only had one person. Normally, you'd have two if it was very busy in a trailer, loading a trailer. So I was working on one of the hardest trailers in the building on PD1. They call it the Tomwa trailer. It goes to Washington. And the first month there, that was my training trailer, and I would come home with, bruises all over. It's a really brutal job, and it was getting quite, I remember getting quite hot in there, because there was a day that it was very, very hot, and those trailers turn into, they just amplify the heat. So if there's heat, the heat inside the trailer is even worse. And then you're working in there by yourself, and you've got your mask on, and you're just sweating, and it was a terrible situation. And the company was making money in a huge way because of the stay-at-home policies and people staying at home and doing remodeling, and people buying things online. So we were, I wasn't there during the beginning of the pandemic, but I was definitely there during the middle and the end of the pandemic period. And I still, we're still in a phase of an an endemic epidemic proportion. Sorry, an endemic pandemic. And the process was very, very difficult, and the company was squeezing every bit of energy out of us, and it was quite difficult. After the 30 days, they needed somebody in the sort aisle, so that's when I moved, and I became a primary package sorter at Swan Island, UPS. And we have one of the only, I believe it's one of the last, and one of its only, one of its only of the kind sort aisles that is completely manual. So I kind of feel like a telephone operator in that sense. These facilities are becoming largely automated, but that's something that's another discussion. But yeah, the work is very physically challenging, and it's brutal. And it's brutal. And a lot of people got sick. A lot of people got long COVID. And even with the mask mandate here in Oregon, there's only so much one can do when working in close quarters, breathing heavily, and trying to manage the goal. I mean, the goal was 300 packages per hour to load into a trailer by yourself and in very hot conditions. So the company really squeezes everything they can out of you.
And so that was an experience for a lot of workers, millions of frontline workers, to work in that kind of situation. And some workers died, Teamsters died, UPS
Yes.
members died. They didn't have air conditioning. And even I heard Amazon has air conditioning in the vans, but apparently UPS didn't want to do that for the workers, even though it was suffocating conditions with the temperature.
That's correct. The package cars for UPS do not have air conditioning, and I believe this new contract only, well, I know this new contract only makes the purchases of vehicles after the 1st of January 2024. So there's no retrofitting, which is ridiculous, and one of the major reasons why I was a part of the Vote No campaign.
So you also were very concerned about this development of what's happening on the shop floor as far as discrimination. So why don't you talk about what happened to you and why how it's affected you and why it's important for all working people to know about it?
Yeah, I mean, this discrimination goes back kind of far. I mean, I could talk about the initial incident with the OSHA. So initially, I was involved with safety activism. There was a high amount of production on the shop floor, which meant that in the sort aisle, people were stacking these bags behind them of mail, and they weren't able to get out. So I reported that to Oregon OSHA. I reported that to fire marshal. I reported that to management. My manager then started moving me around, so I couldn't make a report on that. That was in October of 2021. And then eventually, through a number of after a number of complaints to BOLI, Bureau of Labor and Industries, and a long investigation, we are just now getting some resolution on that retaliation and discrimination for OSHA reporting.
Well, what did they do? I mean, I mean, it's supposed to be illegal to retaliate against a worker who
Yeah, so the
health and
unlawful
safety
employment
complaint.
practice, yeah, so the unlawful employment practice was the fact that my manager was moving me out of seniority order to keep me away from the places that were that were dangerous so that I couldn't report on the hazards. And the state investigator, it took a year, found conclusively that that happened. And of course, we're just now only going um, to to a administrative trial, and that process is started at the end of 2021, and now here we're in 2024. So as you can see, the process for workers and the amount of paperwork and the time that I had to do sitting with the Bureau of Labor and Industries and the National Labor Relations Board and the amount of paperwork, it's astounding just to get a modicum of justice. We have changed that policy on the shop floor. The egress issues for those of us who are in the sort aisle have largely been resolved, so they're not having us put the bags behind us. We go out of a ladder, so that means we can actually get out of our pits if necessary, our sort pits. But when I first went there, it was madness. And what I found interesting was that, or what I found disappointing, was that the union, really the local union, didn't have an official position on this egress issue. In fact, they kind of thought it was really nothing. They thought they placed the blame on the workers. They said, "Oh, well, the workers should take the initiative and turn the belt off." And I said, "Well, that's quite easy to say when you're sitting in your offices, but it's hard for somebody who may be conflict averse, to then turn the belt off and be shouted at by the person who's running the building." So we didn't have a lot of support from Local 162. We didn't have a lot of support from the business agents. And the activism was really about constantly making the reports and fighting it through the regulatory agencies. And we have made the changes, over the almost 3.5 years now, or 3 years now. The changes have been made, but I would say that was not because of the union, but despite the union. And this will go to larger issues that we'll talk about later on. The kind of institutionalized, cozy relationship that we have between labor and management, and also labor, and we can get into it, the far right as well.
So this is a problem nationally. I know in California, there are less than 200 OSHA inspectors for 18 million workers.
Yes.
And workers are afraid to contact OSHA for fear of retaliation, of being fired. And if
Yes.
you don't have a union, you are fired. If you have a union, some process. But did the union, so you're saying the union really didn't make a fight to get the company to protect you, even though
They
there were
they
dangers?
did not make a fight to get the company to change the policy of having the bag stack, but they did initially fight about the retaliation. In fact, my business agent, Ben Vitas, did actually get payment for a missed shift based on retaliation. What was interesting is that I came out for steward elections because our bylaws are silent on that, and I found that our stewards were not doing their job of stewarding the building. And after I came out for steward elections, the business agent, Ben Vitas, was interviewed by the Bureau of Labor and Industries and said, I don't think he was retaliated against. And totally changed. So when I got the transcript of the interview, I immediately spoke to Ben and I said, well, you got a grievance resolution for retaliation, but you're telling the state now that there was no retaliation. Fortunately, the civil rights investigator had the common sense to see the retaliation and ruled that it was an unlawful employment practice despite the union.
So it sounds like he was doing damage control for the company.
Yes, exactly. He was doing damage control for the company, and I think there is a degree of just being spiteful, which is unfortunate because the amount of egotism and control, I'd say just the kind of control freakery that goes around the shop floor. The problem is that a lot of these local leaders, international leaders, joint council leaders, don't realize that the power that they have flows from the membership. But they feel that they are self-appointed demigods, and that if you challenge them, then you're the wrath, then they retaliate, and that's difficult. That's a really difficult situation for people to be in, fighting both management and the union at the same time.
So it has the effect of silencing people and making people feel they're intimidated. They shouldn't say anything when they see that something's wrong, including something that could threaten their health and safety.
Correct, exactly. And then you have people that they see what, in order to get the goodies or in order to get the protection, that they need to follow the party line, and they become very, very dedicated and loyal to that union apparatus, particularly in our safety committees, which are appointed by the union, our stewards, which are appointed by the union. And then they begin to become the eyes, ears, and enforcers on the shop floor for the local joint council and international apparatus. And then you begin to see how, from the shop floor all the way up to the international president and secretary general, secretary treasurer, how this kind of ideological process of business unionism becomes infused down to the shop floor. If you need a steward to help you, or you need a grievance process, or you need help in a certain way, it's very difficult then to oppose this structure because you know that you need to rely on them at some point. And so in order to come out for reform or to be a dissident, is to put yourself in a position where you have a bullseye on your back from both management and unfortunately sometimes the union.
So that's very stressful. So what happened in November? You faced a
Yes.
situation of threats and
So the end of November, there was a young man who 21 years old, quite right wing, I would say, lives outside of Portland. At the end of the shift, he mentioned quite shockingly that he wanted to or was thinking about or fantasizing about massacring trans people and their supporters. At that point, I pulled out my phone and began recording, and I had recorded him going on talking about how he uses the N-word, making comments about autistic people. At some point, saying that, making homophobic remarks, saying that he's country, and that means something about carrying, and I assume that's carrying firearms. Um, and so I immediately that night messaged the safety manager for UPS here and he, to his credit, took immediate action, got security involved. The person was walked out. I gave a written statement. UPS security took the statement. They apparently interviewed this individual the same day, and they did an investigation, but they did not contact the police. They did not contact the police, and I had a unrelated medical issue, so I was out for a couple of days, and I came back, come to my workstation, and this individual is standing there. And so, of course, I immediately call security. I ask them what's going on. There's no response. And
so the company knew that this individual, this young worker, was making threats, talking about things which were really terrifying to you as a queer
and
person. Yeah.
yeah, and not only that, they had audio of most of this conversation. And at that point, I was just astounded that it could even happen, and I was in a state of trauma and PTSD. I didn't even want to go in that day after, but I knew I had to make a written statement, and I thought the company would take action. So that night, I came home and I called up the police to see if a police report had been made. None had been made. So I filed the police report. And then, of course, the process just went through the systematic process of seeing if this person was, quote, an active threat. And of course, I suppose in this country, unless you're, carrying a gun into workplace, you're not an active threat. And the police and management and the union all seem to think, actually, as of last Wednesday, that this individual is not an active threat. And as someone who I work with said, he's basically a ticking shotgun. The other thing that happened was UPS security, because I walk home at night, they said to me that I should get a ride home. Well, that's very nice and kind if if they want to supply me with the taxi ride home, but they obviously didn't. So I'm getting a ride home every night from a friend, and on his lunch or his break, because he works overnight, and various other part-timers who I work with. And I was missing the ability to work later. So I was missing out on time that I could be making more money. So then there was a negotiation where I would be doing setup, starting a bit earlier to compensate for that. And we can get into what happened, but basically, after I filed charges with the local and the joint council and the international about my local president of Local 162, Mark Davison, Um, as of Wednesday last week, when the grievance was so-called resolved about my safety, not only did the union drop any demand, and in fact made me argue about the demand for compensation, and they had no official opposition to this person being in the building. That's another, and they made no official statement. Not only did they drop that, but Ben Vitas smiled and said, "Oh, we've just reminded the company about some seniority issue, that wasn't a problem before." And my setup had been taken away. My manager came down to me and said, "The union told me we can't have you do setup anymore." And that's a $200-300 loss a month for me, and that's a lot of money as a part-timer.
So you're being punished financially because you stood up to what were clear threats to your life by
Yes,
this.
yes, and then spoke out against the fact that our local president, who's also on the general executive board, met with a neo-fascist. So we're seeing this kind of acceptance, tacit and/or overt acceptance of the far right on the shop floor, all the way up to the level of the general executive board. And that's, we had Trump Fest. January was Trump Fest for the IBT, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. At the same time, this process on the shop floor is taking place, where we have virtually someone who has, espouses, the viewpoints of the most odious far right viewpoints you can have, and making the worst threats you can make against a community, which is a massacre, openly talking about that, and it's on record. There's no official position from the union. And then we have this meeting with Donald Trump, who we know has inspired far right attacks inside the United States on various minority groups. And so all of that combined together was a major reason why I last week filed an official charge against General Secretary Treasurer Zuckerman and General President Sean O'Brien, for meeting with for not just meeting with Donald Trump. I mean, Sean O'Brien had dinner with Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago 3 days before the third anniversary of the insurrection. Gave a thumbs up photo opportunity with him, and I think what's shocking is met with him for the purposes of possibly endorsing him for the presidential election, which is just absolutely absurd and beyond reasonable discourse. And then on January 10th, the General Secretary Treasurer Zuckerman sent out a letter saying, "Well, we think it's perfectly legal to donate $45,000 to the Republican National Committee. We're recommending that we do that. You can send your votes in for the General Executive Board to do that." And I believe there was that vote passed, with the exception of one person. John Palmer was a dissident on that, and he was also a dissident. He spoke against the meeting with Trump that happened then on the 31st, where he was allowed to have a private roundtable discussion that was not open to the membership. It was not broadcast. And then to give a rambling 20-minute press conference afterwards, where he went on and said that gangs of people are coming across the border. They're coming from the prisons, insane asylums, and they're terrorists. He calls immigrants terrorists in the lobby of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters with the IBT flag behind him. And Sean O'Brien, in his press conference afterwards, makes no critique of this. He simply says, "Oh, well, we're all from somewhere else." Of course, O'Brien, I don't know if he's educated about the history of the United States, but that statement in itself shows a complete lack of understanding about Native and First Nations individuals, Native American and First Nations individuals in the United States and Canada, because we're not all from somewhere else, Sean. I'll speak to you directly. And some of us are here because of immigration, and some of us are here because of the slave trade. And so clearly Sean O'Brien does not have an understanding about diversity. And on that very same day, he was exposed for having discriminated against and terminated, I believe, 13 organizers who are all black or Latino or Latinx in within hours of taking office in 2022. So clearly, we're dealing with white supremacy at the top of the union, and we're dealing with white supremacy and far-right violence on the shop floor. And it's really quite dangerous because the labor movement needs to be the resistance movement to the far right. And if we have far right elements in our ranks, they need to be educated and isolated, not celebrated, or at least tacitly celebrated in the case of Trump, or at least tacitly allowed to do what they please in the case of this individual on the shop floor.
And the Teamsters represent large numbers of Black workers, of Latino workers, brown workers, yet he's supporting, giving political support, apparently, to an open racist who has attacked Black workers, Blacks in this country, has led to racist attacks encouraged by the President of the United States, attacks against Jews, attacks against queers. And yet that doesn't seem to be of concern to Sean O'Brien and the entire executive board, that they would allow somebody like that to come to their offices, to use their offices, and which you pay for, and other Black and brown Teamsters pay for a campaign appearance.
Correct.
I mean, that must be pretty shocking that you're in a union, and here the union is allowing its lobby to be used as a campaign office for Donald Trump.
Correct. And in fact, in my charge, I said that that violated in principle and in kind Article 1, Section 2A of our Constitution, which says to never knowingly harm another member, to never discriminate against a fellow worker on account of race, color, religion, physical or mental disability, which Trump has done all of those things, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, or any other legally protected group or class. And in meeting with Trump for the purposes of potentially endorsing him for the 2024 presidential election and authorizing funds to the Republican National Committee, which is the central organ of the party of which Trump is going to be the presumptive nominee, the Secretary Treasurer and the General President have knowingly caused harm to our members. They've aided an individual who attempted to overthrow the U.S. government. Mind you, this is unprecedented, to send an armed mob to kill members of Congress and his own vice president. And they've failed to comply with various sections in our Constitution regarding non-discrimination. It's pretty clear that they have committed serious violations, not only of basic ethics and decency, but of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters Constitution. And they should be removed. And everyone in that General Executive Board meeting, and I believe the only person who stood up to it was John Palmer, and he wrote and said, I'm not meeting with an insurrectionist, a scab, and a union buster. All of them should be removed, and they represent the institutional rot of this slate that was elected.
And this, your local union president, Mark Davison, apparently is involved in, retaliation against you.
Yes.
And he's apparently making triple salaries.
Yeah, President Davison is also the president of the Joint Council. He is the international vice president, and he's a trustee on the Western Pension. So that's probably 4 full-time salaries. And not only that, his daughter is on the payroll at the local. So it's a bit of a family business. And
all that business unionism, I guess, put the family on the business.
Exactly.
I mean, isn't there anything in the Constitution that says you can have family members on a business? I mean, it seems like a personal operation, where you bring in people and.
It totally is. I mean, this place is the corruption and the if you look at the Local 162, if you look at the staffing, I sent it to a friend of mine. She's a civil rights activist out of San Francisco. And I said, well, what is one thing that, these all have in common? She said, oh, well, they're all wearing blue shirts as the joke, right? But basically, they're all white men. And the institutionalized racism at Local 162 is incredibly deep, and also it's sexism too. We don't have any women who are business agents. We don't have any people of color who are business agents, and those people are not even brought through the process to become business agents. This is the problem with the union. Apparatus. And in the 90s and the early 2000s, we had a great guy named Harold Williamson who fought. He organized at my facility, Swan Island, Bump, Black Workers United for Making Progress. And he told me a story about how they went to the union hall and basically they said, what are you all doing here? And this is the kind of institutional racism that we're dealing with at Local 162. And here we are in 2024, and we have this guy Mark Davison, who has viciously attacked me in a meeting when I came out against the contract, asked me to come up to the podium to show him a memo, and then later said that I rushed the podium. Okay, had the big guy from the wherever come over and sit next to me as if I was going to, had his crew sit to the side of me, shouting at me all kinds of abuse and everything.
I mean, they
This
were trying to bully you and intimidate you.
Oh, absolutely. They went
Well, you were
after
threatening the order of the meeting. You were threatening the stability of the local, the control of the local, I guess, by standing
exactly.
up and speaking out. How dangerous can you get?
How dangerous can you get? And saying all these outsiders who are bringing lies. And I'm like, I'm actually on the shop floor doing work. I think the last time Mark Davison picked up a package was when he had a delivery. So, these guys, Mark Davison worked as a part-timer in Tualatin, in the 90s. A lot of these people, they haven't been on the shop floor in decades. And they have no idea what it's like to be a part-timer. Once you start making $200,000-$300,000 a year, you become completely removed from the membership. And that's why I think, in terms of labor reform, what we need is we need people who are presidents, vice presidents, who are actually doing the work. Now, I mean, my proposal may be a little bit radical, but I always had the idea that you'd have a co-presidency, someone works part-time, and then part-time president, they're working on the floor, and then you have say the night president, right? And they're part-time, and you get a small stipend to do that, and it keeps you at the level of the shop floor. I don't think that you should be a union leader unless you are still working on the shop floor. This idea of these extended leaves of absences is ridiculous. Once you begin to sit in meetings all day long and make $300,000-$400,000 a year, you have no idea what's going on the shop floor, and you don't care. And then you become willing to make all kinds of compromises, and do whatever you possibly can to hold on to that position because of the money, because of the self-interest. And this is not a radical theory. We know that the material conditions change the way that people think.
And of course, the ILW Local 10 in San Francisco has a bylaw that you can work. You can, if you're elected president of the local or business, you can only be in for 2 terms, and then you go back on the job.
Yes, and that's very good.
And they have yearly elections. So if you screw your members and you have to go back to them, that's a
Yes.
problem. That's a problem.
I would definitely support that kind of change. We need that change. We definitely need, these people need to be coming back to the shop floor. They need to be we need a rotation, and the idea that you're going to get a upper middle class job for life needs to disappear. And this is one thing I want to say, Steve, that the far right and the union busters use all the time against us. You saw it in the ridiculous spectacle of Sean O'Brien trying to have this fight with a senator.
I couldn't believe that. Let's go into a fight, like a drama with who's going to fight in a when the need to mobilize the membership, the workers of this country, how about 500,000 Teamsters and workers in Washington, D.C. demanding air conditioning on trucks? On the
Exactly.
trucks. How about 500,000 saying we have a right to have a health and safety condition on our trucks?
And yet we're reduced to the spectacle of this ridiculous idea of Sean O'Brien beating up a senator on the floor of the health, I think it's the labor health and welfare subcommittee. I probably have the name off a bit. And what I find interesting about that interaction is it really speaks to toxic masculinity that we're dealing with. It really speaks to a lot of this toxic masculinity. It's so embedded, and it's so removed from, as you said, the real issues of the day, which are part-time poverty. There are people in my building, even after we got this so-called best contract ever, who are, which is not, living to a studio and still getting a studio apartment and still going to food banks.
Yeah, I think if these officials had to live like that, maybe it would wake them up.
Yes,
So the
yes,
fact that people have to work 2 and 3 jobs and have to live in their car and they're in a union job.
yes. And they're in a union job. And now we had a major layoff here at Swan Island where they're removing the entire day shift. It's like 260 people. It's horrible. It's horrible. The local has made
And I think Sean O'Brien said that they'd solve the AI, the automation problems in their contract. Have they solved your problems as far as AI and
No,
automation?
so there is an automation clause in the contract, but the only thing that it says is that the union shall be informed. And then there's a slight not even a negotiation process, but basically an informational process between the two. It's a very weak clause in the Constitution. There are no protections against automation taking away jobs. There's no layoff protection. So there are layoffs happening all across the country. UPS wants to get rid of the day shifts. They're doing it. It's a job massacre. They're doing it. They hit Swan Island. 260 some of our brothers, sisters, and friends and comrades beyond the binary being kicked out as of April 7th, I believe now is the day. It was March 28th. And there's been no statement from the local union. No
And
statement
I mean,
from
this is a massive attack on your membership,
Yes.
on
Yes.
these who need jobs, who need to live, to have a good income. And yet Sean O'Brien, where is he on that?
And Mark Davison, they're absent.
Mark
They're
Davidson,
MIA.
the president, what do they say? There's nothing we can do, I guess.
There's
Manage the
nothing we
police.
can do. And in fact, when I spoke to Ben about this, he said, I don't really care if they can't run a company, it's their operation. I don't care what happens. And that was our meeting last Wednesday that kind of really opened my eyes to the retaliation, the disregard for the fact that we have a person who's threatened a mass casualty event against a protected group, a minority group, trans people who are already under attack and assault throughout the country by the far right, and the fact that he just doesn't they don't care about the layoffs because it's operations. The problem is that the union has become so focused on the narrow bandwidth of the contract that they no longer, or maybe they never had, this particular union. I come out of a union history where I was your organizer after college with SEIU and Unite Here. This particular union, the Teamsters, seem to have total disregard for layoffs. We saw this with Yellow. When Yellow went under, Sean O'Brien basically threw his hands up. It's just too bad. Everybody, 20,000
That's
teams.
life. That's life.
That's life.
It
That's life.
happens.
Yeah. And when the rail workers were demanding paid time off for being sick, I think, or even actually it was just not even paid time off, it was time off without being disciplined for being sick. He said, "Oh, Teamsters like to complain." What how many days paid days off does he have if he's sick? I'm sure that he has more than 0, which was what the The problem here is these people are so detached from the membership, and I think there's some sort of the problem with the Teamsters as well is it's sort of like the scene in Casablanca where the inspector comes in and says, I can't believe there's gambling going on in here. I can't believe there's corruption going on in here. I think the issue is the Teamsters have a long history of reactionary politics going back to the alliances with Reagan, Nixon, etc. And what we're seeing is Sean O'Brien is really taking us back to our racist AFL roots. And, in 3 years in office, he's taken us back about 100 years. They proudly say we were founded in 1903, and I think now we've moved back to 1903.
And I've heard also some Teamsters who they were trying to organize, or young workers they were trying to organize, marijuana workers at dispensaries.
Oh yeah, the dispensary workers, yeah.
When they heard that O'Brien had invited Trump to the office and gone to Mar-a-Lago, they said, "We want nothing to do with you." I mean, is this the kind of union that he's offering workers? I mean, you join the Teamsters, you're going to help give money to Trump and these racists, these insurrectionists. I mean, that's a good way of winning workers to at Amazon and others to join the union. You're going to be supporting Trump, who wants really a fascist state.
Yes, yes.
He would like to organize to crush workers, to crush unions if he takes power. He fought unions. He's crossed picket lines. This guy has a history of anti-unionism. That's why the billionaires love him.
He has a history of anti-unionism, has a history of attacking people rhetorically and with policies when he was president. This idea that Sean O'Brien says we're doing our due diligence, we're just checking all of the boxes, it's ridiculous. We know who Donald Trump is. We know who this man is. He has a record. It's not like he was never president. We know what he did when he, banned people who were HIV positive in the military, banned trans people from being in the military, took away protections through the housing and urban development for LGBT persons. The way that he went after LGBT workers, made religious exemptions for federal contractors to fire people on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. This is a man who we know is openly racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, and virulently xenophobic and anti-immigrant. And the fact that Sean O'Brien had this January Trump fest, and then donated material, donated had $45,000 donated to the Republican National Committee, it's beyond the pale, and it does, as you said, it does affect organizing. It does affect organizing. It does affect creating a unified movement. And it does embolden those sections in the labor movement, like the young man that we talked about earlier, that they have a green light on this.
And
They
these
have
officials that have gone along with this whole apparatus that you've been discussing, apparently their job is more important than standing up for principles.
Yes, yes. I mean, it's probably hard for them to put that $300,000 a year away, but obviously their principles are, if dangling money in front of somebody like that can take away their principles, then they really probably didn't have principles in the first place.
And this rise of fascism in this country and around the world, it's not only in the United States and in Argentina,
I mean, in
Italy,
Italy, where
many other
my
countries, yeah.
father's from, Giorgia Meloni, heir of Mussolini. Yeah.
And of course, Trump's father was not a supporter of the Nazis. People don't know that in the
Yeah.
United States. The media has even kept that out. It seems that working people in this country really face uh, a very dangerous situation in which we may have a government completely different, that's a fascist government that goes after people. I mean, he says openly what he's going to do.
Yes, I'm going to be dictator on day one. That's what he says. I mean, he's not holding back. And the first Trump presidency, he was more restrained, I think, because he didn't know all the levers and levels that you have to deal. The levers needed at different levels of power. but he learned a lot, and he's going to use that knowledge, and he's going to bring people who are even more loyal to him to a second administration. And we are really facing the possibility of an authoritarian fascist regime come January 2025.
So your charges against Sean O'Brien, Zuckerman, and the executive board who helped Trump come to the office, voted for it, voted for money for the Republican National Committee. You're talking about the future of not just the Teamsters, but working people in this country.
Yes, correct. Exactly. And I realized that it would put a bullseye on my back, but I needed to do it because this was for me the moment that our leadership crossed the Rubicon. And in doing so, they have gone beyond they've gone beyond the pale, and they have set the labor movement back considerably. And I think that we really need to have a discussion about what it means to fight the far right as a labor movement, not court the far right. And that's exactly what's happening at the highest levels of our union, and even down to the sometimes at the shop floor. And it's very disappointing. But we have to root the fascism out of the labor movement. Unfortunately, we have someone who is openly embracing having dinner with, donating to a fascist candidate. And that means Sean O'Brien, morally, ethically, should not be leading any type of labor movement. In fact, he needs to be back working on the shop floor, as we talked about. Maybe that would give him some common sense.
And TDU, where do they stand? Teamsters for a Democratic Union.
Teamsters for a Democratic Union has largely sold out, and they've become like the PR, the public relations wing of the O'Brien Zuckerman administration. Um, I think that now you have David Levine and Ken Paff have access after all these years of fighting for their access to the halls of the IBT. Now that they have access, and some of them they're on the payroll. I think David Levine is on the payroll. They have completely silent, so that money has bought their silence. And they even put out a post defending the race-based firings of the organizers, I believe a day before they put out a post celebrating Black History Month. So the hypocrisy is just horrible from TDU.
So what can Teamsters do? Should they support your charges
I
and
think
on
we
to them?
should, yeah, definitely file your own charges. File charges as with the general secretary, treasurer, with Zuckerman. The charge is posted online, and the location of where to send it is posted online. You can send it to DC. Get involved with Teamsters Mobilize. They're doing a lot of great work with organizing, making the union more democratic, making the union more accountable, making the union a better place for people to engage and to organize in. And then, of course, keep fighting on the shop floor, keep fighting management, and keep organizing. That's the most important thing.
And one of the things that Teamster Mobilize says is we need a working class party. We need a working class alternative.
Yes.
The Democrats and Republicans really are representing the corporations, the military. I mean, they seems like they have unlimited money for billions for war. But East Palestine, which had its anniversary, they can't even get health care. The
Yes.
workers and residents of East Palestine, they're fighting for that. We're fighting to get Biden to actually issue a declaration under the Stafford Act that they can get health care because they've been contaminated by this railroad. And yet it's a battle.
Severe contamination. Yes. Severe contamination. I think the issue is we're spiraling into a very dangerous situation whereby we have a authoritarian fascist who is moving ahead to possibly become the next president. And a lot of the problem of the complicity is that Joe Biden has not only the anti-labor activities that he did while he's president, but tying his election to Bibi Netanyahu and the genocide in Gaza, which is another discussion to have, but Teamsters Mobilize is addressing that. The fact is that these are very dangerous times for us because the need for a workers' party is there, but between now and November, the practicality of developing that is slim. So we need a longer term strategy that will take us to 2028. And between now and November, really hardening ourselves against the far right and maybe just sort of getting ourselves a little bit of breathing room so that we can create that workers' party might be a sensible solution. But I don't have all the answers, so I am hopeful that we can make some changes and take dramatic action to democratize the labor movement and small d democratize the labor movement, bring the power back to the shop floor, bring the power back to the members, isolate the far right, and educate. And that's going to be very important. And yes, eventually develop a labor party.
And of course, the Vermont AFL-CIO passed a resolution for a general strike in 2016 against an attempted coup and insurrection. That was shut down by Richard Trumka, the past president of the AFL-CIO, who said that they didn't want to talk about it because it might have given a pretext for Trump to institute martial law. So, I mean,
We have to stop being afraid of Donald Trump. We need to take him on, and we need to stop trying to either coddle him or be afraid of him. We need to take him on and fight him because he has a record. I mean, his 4 years of office have already taken away a woman's right to choose, which is also a workers' rights issue. Roe v. Wade was overturned because of his Supreme Court nominees.
well, a unity of women, of workers, black and brown. We could have a march and rally of 100,000. We could have a general strike in this
We
country.
could have a
if
general
working
strike.
people come together, and I think that we're going in that direction more and more. So I want to thank you for joining us, Tony. And I think we've covered a lot of territory. And I think you're taking up, you're really the defense of your life. And
Yes.
the job is not just about you, it's about all working people. It's about all Teamsters.
Yes.
You
And
have
in
to
my
stand
building
up your,
specifically, it's about the safety of the people that work with me who are possibly exposed to this individual who wants to express the massacre event.
exactly. So it's a health and safety on the job. It's the future of working people in this country. So I want to thank you for joining us on Work Week in Pacifica.
Thank you, Steve.
Tonight, a quote, union buster, scab, and insurrectionist. That's what a top Teamsters executive is calling Trump as the former president meets with the union. Would be unprecedented. Vice President at large, John Palmer, will be my guest in a moment, though refused to attend the union meeting today with Trump. This is just days after Palmer sent a letter to the Teamsters president, Sean O'Brien, where he argued that Trump should not be welcomed by the 1.3 million member union, saying in part, quote, he's a known union buster, scab, and insurrectionist. We should never entertain dialogue with a candidate with such an anti-union record. John Palmer is now out front. So, John, we understand this meeting happened today, and I know you chose not to go. Trump called the meeting, quote, very strong. He sounds very confident that the Teamsters will endorse him, obviously your union. 1.3 million Americans are a member of your union. What have you heard about what happened in that meeting today?
Well, I saw a list of questions. There were a lot of tough questions asked concerning where he stood and what he might do in his next term. But my sense is, we already know who this man is. You judge people by the actions that they take, right? And all the things that I said, scab, union buster, insurrectionist, are provable beyond a doubt. He crossed the picket line with the IBT people. He hired union busters to staff the Department of Labor, the National Labor Relations Board, which affects us greatly because I'm an organizer and I've had to deal with the labor board. And, as far as the insurrection goes, we all saw what happened. There's folks that want to somehow dress that up as a vacation day for some folks. And that's very unfortunate.
Do you think, though, from what you're hearing from your peers and your union, those of you running the union, do you think Trump really has a chance at getting this endorsement?
I would say zero. I don't believe he does have a chance. I was disappointed in the appearance, particularly the press conference that occurred after the meeting. I think it it sends out a sort of, it was in my letter where I suggested that it's a tacit endorsement. He is not going to do anything for labor. He never has done anything for labor, and frankly, he's not a trustworthy individual.
So after the meeting today, and you talk about when he spoke, but he was asked about your criticism specifically, and I wanted to play part of that exchange. Here it is.
One of the Teamsters executive board members objected to your visit today, calling you a known union buster, scab, and insurrectionist. What's your response to that?
They're wrong about that. I've dealt with unions for my whole life. I've had a great relationship with unions.
So what do you say to that, John? And you've looked at his history with unions. Great relationship with unions, he says.
I think we know about Donald Trump's long history and inability to tell the truth. I mean, I just laid out exactly why I said those three things, and he's guilty of all those things. It's fact. A rock is a rock. When you thump on it with your knuckles are going to bleed. So I know folks live in information bubbles and take on different viewpoints, but we all need to look for truth. And as leaders, it's incumbent upon us to tell the truth to our members. Now, I served in the military. I'm very proud of that service. My whole family did. I also believe that I lost an uncle in Korea who I never knew, but people died so we could have the right to disagree. I'm fine with people having a different viewpoint, but as a leader, it's my responsibility to lay the facts out for folks. And this is for working men and women in general. Let's go beyond unions. Everything, the good things that happen with unions transfer into the non-union workplace. So yes, go ahead.
So, I know, obviously, you made it clear that you don't support Trump, actually, that you do support Biden, but I want to ask you something about your union itself, right? And just what's happened in this country in terms of, political shifts, right? 1.3 million members, as I mentioned a moment ago. Our Harry Anton's been going through the numbers, and, he's pointed out that the Democratic edge with union voters has declined dramatically, right? In 1948, it was a 62-point edge, 21 points now in 2020. So do you worry that a lot of people in your union simply don't see it this way, that they would be happy to have the union endorse Trump?
I think it is a cause for concern, and I think sometimes as we rise in the ranks of leadership, we become disconnected from the membership, and as an organizer, a person who education is everything. Yep. And instead of endorsing somebody or playing footsie with somebody who clearly isn't going to work in our best interest, we should be out there talking to our members. The facts are pretty clear as to why this man should not get our endorsement. I'm certain he won't.